Hey Emily, I thought I'd just do a video and try to explain what's going on. I'm really sorry I didn't catch that um, Sunday, Monday, whenever you had that up. Um, as I said, it's not going to be a big have a big impact on your grade, but it's possible it could cause a problem for the portfolio. They started reading the portfolios about noon yesterday, but I'm not sure if the people reading your classes have read them yet. So I would say try to get the revision in, and then if they read it ahead of time, there's gonna be a final chance on Friday morning to have people look at any appeals, and if something happens, I'll try to get it in there. I'm chairman of the portfolio committee, so I have a little bit of pull that I'm gonna try to use. But anyway, I wanted to show you what it's supposed to look like, and then I can look at yours. So this is Emika's essay 3 on his blog. So a couple of his, I talked to him about, because he had this tendency to put his in-text citations at the end of the paragraphs, and really I'd like to see them right after a quote or after specific information. But here he's used the person's name in the signal phrase that introduces the quote. So that lets the reader know that this came from a source by McLeod. And if you go down here, they're in alphabetical order, and you can find McLeod, so it's this source. But generally speaking, the way in-text citation usually works is the way he's doing it in this paragraph here. So he's got this is not a quotation, but it's specific information that came from a particular source. So anytime you have information that's coming from one of your sources, whether it's a quote or whether it's just information that you put in your own words, or it's some kind of idea that you got, sometimes it's just a term or something, you need to tell the reader where that came from. That helps to bolster your credibility. If you didn't put it at all, it would look like you're just saying this and could just be off the top of your head. You're not giving any source to back yourself up. So putting this source in here lets your reader see where the information comes from, that it's not just something that you made up, it's something that came from an actual source. And then if they wanted to check the source, they can go down to the works cited and get the information and be able to find the source. If they wanted to get more information or more context, they have access to the source then. So this is the way, if you paraphrase material, this is the way you do the in-text citation. So as I say, 75%, 48%, we know this isn't something that Emika knew off the top of his head. He read it somewhere. So at the end of this sentence, before the period, he puts parentheses and then the author's last name. If in most cases, students these days are using electronic sources, that is, things that came off the internet. So the author's last name typically is all that you'd use. If you happen to have a source that doesn't have an author, if it was some organizational report, say, that was written by a bunch of anonymous, cogs in the wheel that don't put their names on things, then you'd start with the title. You'd have the title of the article. The logic of this is that this is going to be alphabetized, so the reader's going to see the name Bakakis and be able to find it by using the alphabet, just as you'd use it to find a word in a dictionary. And if, say, this source if Bohannon hadn't been the author of this source, the in-text citation this would have been left off, and the in-text citation would have started with the title Eyewitness Testimony. He should have capitalized these, the T and the M. Would have just started with Eyewitness Testimony. So what you would put in the parentheses for the in-text citation is the title of the article, because that's what you'd use to find it alphabetically. If you had a relatively long title like this, you could just use the beginning, Eyewitness Testimony, just Eyewitness Testimony, maybe with parentheses, and then the quotation marks, eyewitness testimony, end quotation marks, close parentheses. Okay, so let's go back up here. So he's got that one. Where are we? Here we go. There's some other information here. I would kind of like to see a citation here when I see these statistics after that sentence. The general rule is if you have a run of sentences that all come from one source, you don't have to put the in-text citation every sentence. You could put it at the end of that. But this is such specific information. I think it would have been a little bit better if he'd put the citation here. This is sort of generalized information that may have been in the source, but he also could have come up with that on his own thinking. So that's in-text citation. Now, what you have most of the time, I think, are quotes. So even, similarly as to paraphrase stuff, I don't know if he has any quotes much here. He had this one that he gave the author's last name here. Okay, so let me go to yours. I'm going to look at your, what you just sent me, this last one. And I'm not sure if this matches exactly what you've got on the blog, but it didn't look like it had the in-text citation. Right. Is this gonna, okay, okay. Okay, so as I said in the notes on your rough draft, you're not really using a lot of sources here, which would have been nice if you could have used a little bit more information from the sources, but let's see what you're going to do in terms of the in-text citation. Okay, so you're not going to use this sort of linking here, hyperlinking. That's a blog format kind of way of citing sources. So if you're just going to do something on the blog, that's a common way to do it. But what we're trying to get across in English 101 is kind of the academic way to do it. And normally you're not going to be using blogs probably that much, unfortunately, in your classes. So what you'll have are papers that'll be turned in paper maybe or emailed, but they won't generally have these kind of hyperlinks because your instructor may be grading on paper or whatever. But the format for academic papers is to use the in-text citation in combination with the works cited. So this one, the smartphone, rather than trying to remember, that's what makes a human a human. If we store information outside our bodies, if you to blaze on a trail. Okay, so here's a quote. So I'm assuming this is coming from one of your sources. Now, one thing, this isn't a make or break issue, but it's not very good form to just drop in a quotation without introducing it. So your reader's going along here and jams right into that these quotation marks. I talk to my readers, my students, if I'm talking face to face, it's as if you're talking on stage and somebody comes from the wings and comes in without any introduction, just grabs the microphone out of your hand and starts talking. It's abrupt to do it that way. So normally you'd have some words that of your own to introduce the quote and give some indication of where it came from sometimes, or how it connects to what you've been saying. And then at the end of this, so I'm assuming because this had the NBC news thing, Bill Nye thing, that this is coming from this source. Now, it's a little bit of a somewhat unusual situation. If the quote came from Bill Nye, we have what's called an indirect quote, where Bill Nye, presumably, I'm guessing, said the information, but this Rothman guy wrote the article. So that would be a case where you would have to use, if Bill Nye said the information, you would have to use his name here, Bill Nye's name. That's the only way you're going to acknowledge him. The citation is going to come here. You're going to have the S at the end of bodies, then the closed quote, then a space for the citation, and then a period. If it's the case that Bill Nye said the quote, but you can't put Bill Nye here in parentheses because Bill Nye isn't one of your sources, and your reader is just going to look here. And now if we get this alphabetized, so that's another thing, you would alphabetize these. Pasquinelli would come first. Your reader's going to look down here and look for Bill Nye. Now, this is a short Works Cited page, so I can see Bill Nye over here, but you're not, suppose you had a 20-page Works Cited page, like at the end of a book, you're not going to expect the reader to have to read all of these looking for Bill Nye somewhere. They're going to just use this alphabetical order of in order to find it. So with the indirect citation, you use, let's see if I can use Bill Nye's name up here, and then the S, close quotes, parentheses, and you use the abbreviation QTD period. QTD period in Rothman is what the citation would be here. QTD period stands for quoted in Rothman. So that's telling your reader that Rothman didn't say this quote, but it's in his article. So that's a somewhat unusual. I was hoping not to have to get into that, but slide rules, I remember slide rules. Studies here again, studies have shown, so this comes from is information, it's not a quote, but this is something that you read in one of the sources, and I can probably tell if I look at the hyperlink here is technology to smartphones make us smarter. So that's this one. So what you'd use for the in-text citation for that sentence would be Shah. And then it would go here. If this is, and then again, you'd want to introduce this quotation with something. If this is all one from one source, which it presumably is, you could just put the citation here at the end of the quote. And then you had a third source, so that's coming in somewhere here, I imagine. Okay, so that's the in-text citation bit. And let me just, for future reference, let me just show you if I can get to the blog. So this is a really useful site if you're using MLA. The Purdue Online Writing Lab MLA section is something that many English faculty and other faculty send their students to. It has a section for APA as well, which you will probably use in many of the other courses that you might be taking. But it goes into all the details about citation, how to do the works cited page, whether you've basic format, books, periodicals, electronic sources, that would be the common one that most students would be using, or other sources would include films and interviews and photographs and various other sorts of things. But the in-text citation basics is here. So that shows you somewhere down here the indirect quotations, and it shows what to do with situations where you have multiple authors. Notice page numbers here appear sometimes. That implies that you had a paper, like a book, that had a page number. If you're getting it electronically, we're assuming that you can search for the place where the quotation appeared with a Control F, so you don't have to put a page number. And page numbers for electronic sources generally, that implies you're printing something out, and it depends what magnification you have for the page. If you do have a PDF that has page numbers on it, and it looks like scanned in uh, copies of the pages of a academic journal or something, then sometimes you will see people putting in page numbers. Multiple works by the same author, multi-volume works, all kinds of different situations. This is the indirect sources with this QTD period in Wiseman. Again, generally speaking, for electronic sources, no page number. So that Ravitch said the quote, it was published in something that Wiseman wrote. So that's handling that. And then the electronic sources are down here, sources from the internet, as I said in that other email. The other thing, let me just quickly, while I got you on the hook, and I may have pointed this out to you before, but there is a good, oh, it's not listed here. University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has a really great writing center, and they have a lot of handouts that I link to in the class, and they have a really nice quotation. This is a good one to look at for any sort of thing. It has a lot of different writing issues. Some of these are little videos, but the quotations one, when you're talking about introducing the quotes, signal phrases, and different kinds of ways to set up your quotations, there's some really good advice and examples here. If this comes up in future classes that you're taking, either English 102 or something else. Okay, so I think that's it. As I said, I'm not sure whether your portfolio has been read now yet, but let's cross our fingers and hope it hasn't. And then if you could quickly try to get the in-text citations fixed. If it was read and by some chance they nitpicked things and failed at just the portfolio just because of this, as I said, I'll try to get it taken care of, and don't worry unduly. I think your writing this semester was really strong, and I haven't calculated a grade, but you're pushing the A- anyway, I think. So we'll hopefully we'll be able to get things worked out by the end of the week at the latest. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'm gonna try to get out of this.